That's why the head has no ears. And the eyes depicting money, time, and the third eye being love, they're all symbols of human interaction. And the chain at the nape of the neck is symbolic of Max Weber's view on capitalism. Like I said, the iron cage that society will not be able to grow in.
Oh, there we go. Yeah!
My name is Dr. Laura Pachenko, and I'm an associate professor of sociology at Miramar College. I also am the founding director of Project Paint, the Prison Arts Initiative, which is a visual arts program that operates at both the Richard J. Donovan Correctional Facility, which is here in San Diego, and then also Centinela State Prison, which is in Imperial. I wanted to participate in the Summer Institute because I think it's such a great way for us to learn tips and tricks to make our classes that much better, especially now that we're doing so much in terms of online courses. I think there's a lot of ways that we can engage our students that maybe we just haven't thought of or that we haven't had the opportunity to do so. So I'm very excited to get to learn from all of you, hear your ideas, and share a little bit about what we do in our classes as well.
Hi, my name is Miriam Simpson. I'm a physics instructor and the chair of engineering and physical sciences at Cuyamaca College. I also teach a workshop within my own department where my colleague Scott Stombach and I teach the faculty both in our department and anybody who wants to show up about research-based techniques for teaching, and we try to give real live demos in person and create support for people who want to implement any research-based pedagogy that's known to improve success and equity in their classes. Because of this, I was really excited to see that TSI was happening, and I was invited to help share some of the stuff that I've been doing in my classroom and that we've also been implementing in my entire department. So I'm really excited to be here with you today and to share some of the successes we've had and really work with other people to make sure that we can provide these kinds of opportunities, not just in my own department, but across the county. I think the default setting in teaching is to teach the way you were taught. And one of the things I've really enjoyed about having this whole incident where we've had to really just shift everything we do to online. I know it's terrible and it's a pain and it takes a lot of work, but it's really forced us to reevaluate which things in our class are really important and how can we present them in a new format. Changing this paradigm of how we teach and where we teach really forces us to grapple with the goals of our class and what are we really doing, and are we using the most modern pedagogical techniques that we have available to us, or are we just doing the same thing we've always been doing? So to get started, I want you to refer to the packets that came on Canvas. We have just a packet of worksheets that you can do with this video, and I want you to think about what your goals are for students coming out of your class. This could be anything from, you want them to be better people to you want them to know the Krebs cycle. So just take a minute, pause the video, and work on this worksheet. So here are my answers for physics, although you could say that one of my colleagues wrote that he wanted students to have more curiosity about the world, and so there's a lot of different answers you can give. And these are Laura's answers for sociology, so there's definitely lots of room to explore here. In many classes, traditional assignments tend to be tests, labs, quizzes, essays, group discussions, these sorts of activities that are standard in the academic setting. And when we do these sorts of projects, we tend to be taking one of those things and replacing it. And we'll be talking about sort of the mechanics of that later. But I think the biggest issue for a lot of faculty is, why are we replacing these things that we are pretty sure work? And I really want you to take a look, now that you're grounded in your goals for the class, in the student perspective on what they're going to get from these more student-centered assignments. Sometimes they end up being a little bit more work from a faculty perspective, but we'll show you later with some planning, you can actually make it not much more difficult for you, but maybe a lot more robust for your students. So I really want to take some time and look at the student perspective. So both Laura and I have interviewed students that have participated in these projects and really look at what they got out of the assignment. Because I think sometimes when we have specific outcomes in mind, we forget about all the things that we are missing. And so there's a lot in these interviews of things that students found that they didn't get out of a traditional class, but they did get out of these student-centered assignments. Just for some context on what you're watching, I transformed 3 traditional in-class labs into one at-home lab that students designed themselves and then performed and took data on. And Laura transformed a traditional final exam into a comprehensive art project. Well, so I just wanted to ask you guys, how did you think this lab compared to like what we regularly do in lab?
Yeah, I would say it's fairly different, but it's like an important learning experience. When you're in a classroom setting, like that experiment that you do has already been done in the past. In the real world, you have a job that you have to do by yourself, and then there's like no one that has done that prior to you.
It basically falls on us to troubleshoot each and every phase. So if something doesn't work, we have to find a solution for it. It's really just like a whole real world experience.
What did you like about this format?
Well, personally, I like that I got to do a lot of things on my own. And I think just like for me, I feel like that's when I like do my best. So in that aspect, I really enjoyed the lab. And I got to learn a lot of things that I would have not been able to in like a regular lab, because you have to like spend more time on that project. And yeah.
Did it feel like it was more interesting, or was it just more frustrating?
A little bit of both, but I feel like they went hand in hand.
Okay.
It was frustration in the beginning, but at the end it was like very like fulfilling. I think that's like really like positive experience to have.
Would you say you think you learned more from this lab or from like a standard in-class lab?
Definitely learned more.
All right, so talk us through your process in creating that assignment.
So at first I was confused on what I was going to do. I was thinking that, I could probably just make a comic or a vision board. And then I thought to myself, why not go extra? And anyone who knows me knows I love being extra. And I was thinking to myself, while I was going through Walmart, I went into Walmart and I had no clue what I wanted. And I was just going through the arts and crafts, just opening my mind. And I had like a notepad full of highlights of the lessons.
I love
that. And I was looking to see if there were any examples, anything I could relate, anything at all. And then I saw this styrofoam head. And I'm like, oh, the things I could do to this thing.
Totally. Inspiration struck. Yes.
Inspiration was immediate. And I was like, oh, I could, this is perfect. This is a human styrofoam head. I could add a third eye, for insight. There's so many symbolic things with this project. I tell you, I don't even think that we would have time to discuss all of it, because all the subliminal messages, there's even a bit of rock culture in there.
Yeah.
It's crazy. I was going to do a mohawk of that green moss, and I decided not to, because I don't know. I wasn't sure it was going to be straight to the point. I wanted the lesson to not be overlooked. I wanted it to be extra, but I wanted the lesson to not be overlooked. So when I picked up the styrofoam head and I held it in my hand, I felt the inspiration. I started flipping through my notes, just spot on everything. I was thinking, oh, maybe I could hollow out the head, maybe have some brain-like structure in there. And I'm just all like inspired. And I started piecing together things. I was going to put some fabric pom-poms in there. I decided not to. And then I found the dried moss, and I thought to myself, this could be like the grass being greener on the other side. And I saw the popsicle sticks. On top of being inspired, I was also very broke. So I thought, what can I make the most out of? And I thought to myself, popsicle sticks and something to represent grass being greener on the other side. Because I could mold popsicle sticks. I got popsicle sticks, glue, the moss, and then different kinds of paint to mix for the different kinds of colors of skin. And it wasn't until the very last part of me finding the things that I thought of the glitter, and I wanted to know what would take it over the edge. And I was looking at it, and I was already thinking race. I already pieced together the iron necklace symbolizing the iron cage that Max Weber was talking about.
Yes, that's wonderful.
And I thought there needs to be something to take this over the top. I need this to be remembered. Because the lesson was so important to me. When I first learned about it, it was a eureka. And I needed people to feel that for some reason. And when I came across the glitter, my cousin and I were having this hilarious discussion about what sneaky little tricks you can do with glitter for people you don't like.
Uh-oh.
And we were laughing about it, and then I thought to myself, yeah, glitter does really get everywhere, and it gets into everything. Matter of fact, black glitter specifically, you could never find every single piece if you spill it. And then I started thinking to myself, that is such a toxic way to get into, like, to me, glitter was like, it gets into everything, and you can never weed it out. You spill it on your floor. If you have carpet, you're done for. And the minds of society, young and old, appeared like a carpet inside of my brain. And the glitter, just mentally, it spilled out. You could never pick out every single piece of glitter. The toxicity that emits from the social conflict that I think it was Karl Marx who was talking about social conflict. I think that's his theory. And the toxicity that's emitted from it, you can't pick it out of every single culture because now it's ingrained. Socially, it's ingrained in tradition, in pop culture, it's in songs, and now it's in the minds of the youth where they're struggling to get their piece of the pie, the American dream. Just add money. And I never stopped thinking about that from the day I stepped foot in that single classroom, your classroom. And I thought to myself, I always ate those box dinners, just like add water. My family was broke, so that appealed to me.
Yeah.
And I was like, just add money? What? And it just rang clear in my mind how much of a scam the entire idea of the American dream was and how much it related to the social conflict theory. I actually located a picture of the project itself, so I reviewed that a little bit.
Yeah.
And I also found the inspiration for where it all started, basically. And I remember writing this down. It says the head is a visual representation of social conflict theory. Social conflict theory is Karl Marx's social theory that individuals in society function on conflict and competition rather than peace and equality in resources. Because of different types of conflict, people will acquire more resources or material things through different means of their social roles or their status. And the head has no ears because in conflict, there's hardly anyone listening to each other. That's another thing I first saw on the styrofoam head. You would think that a styrofoam head made for crafts would have an ear or two, and it didn't. And I thought to myself, this is perfect.
Yeah.
Although these interviews only represent a small subset of the students that have participated in these projects, the sentiment is generally the same. Students find the project-based, the student-centered learning harder, more challenging, and more time-consuming, but they're generally more willing to take on these more difficult tasks, and they find them pretty rewarding. So hopefully now that we've convinced you that this is a good idea, we'd really like to get into the mechanics of how you can create student-centered assignments in your class the way that we have in ours. So Laura and I are going to walk you through a few of the key items we've found are critical to the success of making these sorts of assignments work. So we're going to start out with which assignments in your class might make good candidates for this sort of transformation into a student-centered assignment. Then we're going to talk about the goals we have for those assignments and how they align with our course goals that we laid out in the first exercise. Then we'll talk about designing a schedule, so how to make sure that you give students enough time to get feedback and to make corrections to the work that they're doing. And then we'll talk about designing a rubric and how to make sure your grading when you have a bunch of diverse projects really is fair and even and messages to the students what you want them to get out of the assignment. And then finally, we're going to follow up all of that with just a short discussion about, how do we make this sort of assignment equitable? Like if we have students that just don't have the resources to do an art project, is there a way we can provide them with some equipment or resources in order for them to get this done? So we'll talk about some of the pitfalls at the end. Okay.
So how do we decide which of our assignments to translate into this more student-centered approach? This is where we really do have to do a very solid evaluation of what we're trying to accomplish in our classes and what we think our current assignments are doing. So for a lot of these, I try to take a step back and say, do I just keep doing these assignments because I've been doing them, because I know how to do them, because I know how to grade them, or are they actually things that students are responding to? So one of the first ways that I started incorporating this particular project was looking at the responses that students had to some of my current assignments. One of the things that I noticed was the level of anxiety that I was seeing during finals week, that students were beside themselves. I would have students regularly telling me that they weren't sleeping at all. And it felt to me very problematic, right, that this was happening for students, but also that it didn't really seem to me to be a perfect way of assessing their true learning in a course. The idea that they could regurgitate some information for multiple choice questions on an exam or write out something that we had discussed in class in a short answer or essay question on a final, sure, I mean, that can demonstrate learning, but the level of stress that I saw accompanying that, along with the notion that perhaps this was something that then would be forgotten, just a few minutes later, it really made me think about, is this as beneficial as I'm hoping it would be? Am I just giving final exams because I had to take final exams because I thought that that was a way of demonstrating learning? And I also, in kind of that same vein, I started to think about my own educational experience and what I remembered from it. So I hope that you all will do this too. So I'm going to do mine, and then I want you to take a couple of minutes and brainstorm this experience for you. So I look back on my educational career, and to be perfectly honest, the things that I remember were arts-based. So when I reflect back on elementary school, I immediately think about the mission project, which of course is very problematic, but still, right, it stuck with me. And that kind of critical angle is part of it, right, which is very, very important. I remember doing a solar system diorama. I remember drawing out the eye, and in fact, it was my eye. So they had us look at our eyes, and I was so excited about that project that I did 2 versions of it. I first had my marker drawing, and then I wanted to do pastels as well because I told everyone there were yellow flecks in my eye, and it was super important to document that. And we had to label all of the different parts of the eye. I remember songs that we sung in order to learn things. So of course, one of the most basic examples of this is something like singing the ABCs, but it comes in many other variations as well. I remember poems that we talked about in class. The list goes on. This continued on throughout middle school and high school too. I remember things that were hands-on. I still remember dissecting a cow's eyeball, right? I remember doing mind maps in my classes. These are the things that I recall. I took an AP English class. The only paper, we had to write 10-page, what did he call them? Memos or something. That is a total misnomer, right? But we had to write these 10-page papers every 2 weeks. The only one that I remember from that entire semester was the photo-based essay, where I had to argue how the photograph that I had taken represented these different, these different authors. Actually, that's a lie. I also remember doing the oral final exam, which I was really, nervous about, but ended up being so interesting, so wonderful. I still remember a question that my teacher asked me. Mr. Wimes was his name. Mr. Wimes asked, what aisle of the grocery store would you find Virginia Woolf? And I said the alcohol aisle. And he gave me an A. So that's what I remember, right? And I thought, if that's what I was remembering, if that's what really stuck with me, 20, 30 years later, then this is what we should be doing with our students. Then we need to do something that's hands-on, like Miriam's lab, or that's arts-based, like my arts-based sociology project. Anything that connected with you, think about how you can translate that for our students and listen to your students. They are a wealth of knowledge. They have amazing ideas. I'm constantly asking them for feedback. I want them to tell me what's useful for them. You can hear in the interview with Cherice, one of my former students, how helpful it is to have something like some examples. And again, not as something to copy, right? Or something to really, feel like you have to have a crutch, right? Something to help you along, but more just to start off that inspiration, to really feel connected to something or to feel solid, right? Because a lot of the time, we're self-conscious. Our students are very self-conscious. They don't want to do something, quote unquote, wrong. And we really want to show them that what they're doing is not wrong, that they're on the right track. And all of this, every step of this, the idea of giving feedback to them, letting them know, that they are doing great things, it really means a ton. And it sets them up perfectly to be successful in our courses.
So keeping in mind the stuff that you set up as the goals for your course and all of this wonderful information that Laura's given us about her motivations for creating these student-centered assignments, now it's your turn to try out figuring out what assignments you have in your traditional class that you could change into something more robust, like a project-based lab or an art-based final. So I'd really like you guys to dig deep. If you turn to exercise 2 in your packet, then it's a good time to sort of pick out the assignments that you would replace and sort of sketch out some ideas about what you might do instead. So we're going to take a little bit of time now, and you can work on that. Come back to us when you're done. So now that you have an assignment in mind, it's really helpful to sort of look at the goals that you have for your assignment. Now these should be related to the goals that we have for the course, but we want them to be specific to the assignment. So for instance, in my class, the goals I have for a physics course where I want them to be able to analyze data, that works really well for a lab, but maybe solving hard problems is less applicable to the lab assignment. So, and then for Laura's class, her goals for the class really match up nicely with her goals for the project itself. We really want you to think about your goals for the particular assignment, but also think about how these relate back to your original goals. And then if you'll notice in the examples both Laura and I gave, we're always trying to reinforce skills that we learned earlier in the class and then use the project to sort of reach to a broader goal. And so we'd really like you guys to think about ways you could do that too, because the reality is these more free-form assignments give you a little bit of freedom to let students be creative, and you want to encourage that whenever you can. So I'd like you to go to exercise 3 in your packet. Look through the examples that Laura and I gave for our goals for the transformed assignment, and then figure out what yours are, and then check back with your original goals for your class and see if those make sense still.
Let's talk a little bit about the scheduling phase of all of this. So the idea is that you want to be able to plan ahead and really set the students up for success in whatever your project ends up being. But you also want the students to be able to really think about how they can kind of step by step get to whatever their end goal is. So if you take a look at the packet, exercise 4 is where you will draft a proposed schedule. So you'll see that for Miriam's home physics lab, the idea is that the students have to submit an initial proposal at least 1 week from when the project is announced. That way, they're starting to think through what the different steps are, for this larger project. Because of course, this is replacing multiple other assignments in Miriam's case. There's also then a draft before the final project, and having a draft is really, really helpful for students. That way, they get some insight into what exactly they're missing so far, what they need to be working on more, what else, they should really spend their efforts on getting from the draft to the final. This is also something that tends to be much less overwhelming for students if they have little pieces of it at different points in time. So separate from the sociology arts project that I've presented in this discussion, we also use a series of check-ins in some of my other projects in class, and I found that to be really helpful. Sometimes the check-ins are as simple as tell me what option you've picked of the available ones, but it means that students, they have to have read the prompt at that point, which generally we've also discussed in class, of course, but then they have to commit to something, and they generally have to find maybe at least 1 or 2 sources for their project. Of course, this will vary depending upon what exactly you decide to do, but it's a really helpful way to get students invested early on and then be able to intervene if there is something awry. Like one example in my case is sometimes students will submit a source, and even though I've told them what the criteria are for good sources, perhaps it doesn't quite meet that. Maybe I've asked for a newspaper article and we get something from the Onion, that sort of thing. So it's a really nice way of making sure that you're setting students up for success and that they get this kind of positive feedback along the way to know that they're on the right track. In the case of my arts-based sociology project, I do this in kind of another way where we set the students up starting from week 1. So this project is at the very end of the semester, but actually on the very first day of the course, I tell students that they should be thinking forward to the end of the semester when I'm going to be introducing this assignment. So they hear about it really early on, and it kind of sets this tone that every week we're doing something that we're going to be using, right? That's not just at this one moment in time, but it's going to be something that we can continuously apply from this point forward. I also then do, after going through a discussion, of how they're going to go about their arts-based project, I have them turn that in, and then I have them do a follow-up assignment that's based on that. And it's meant to be really like a sharing experience. One of the things about the arts-based project that I love so much is how creative everyone gets, how they have these amazing ideas. And I think it's a really nice way for them to showcase the work that they've done and, really share with one another what they've learned and teach each other something. And it's a great way too, if you're thinking about incorporating something like that as preparation for an exam. It can help them review for it. If you weren't thinking about replacing it, with an exam, it could be a great, build up to another project. However you think, it could work really well, is sort of just a way of modifying it for your particular needs and for the students' needs in your classes. But this idea of thinking ahead and really planning it all out is very, very important. Building in any kind of check-in, any sort of draft, anything where the students can get some initial feedback before they have to submit a final draft is a really great idea. Having something like a buffer as well, after it's due, that can be really nice. Sometimes instructors will build in that when someone submits something, if they point out some kind of error, that they could go back and fix that and resubmit. I think the point here is that we want our students to get something out of these assignments. And so we want to think through what's the best way of doing that. I wanted to mention something about why it's so important for students to have multiple steps along the way, especially for larger projects. If you give something like do a research project, to a student, it can be very, very overwhelming and feel really completely impossible, totally undoable. And I think that when we break it up into chunks, it becomes much more accessible for students. So think about, for something like the arts-based project, maybe they have to submit some kind of sketch, whatever it is, thumbnails of what they're planning to do. Perhaps for a research project, and I do this in multiple of my courses as well, I'll have students work on pieces of the project over multiple weeks of the semester. So something like they have to submit their potential research question in week 1 of the project. Then in week 3, they have to submit a literature review. Maybe a couple weeks after that, they have to submit a plan for their methodology section. Then they need to go out, start doing some data collection of their own and process some of those results. And so then present us with a preliminary data section and a discussion section. And students have told me over the years that this makes it so much more manageable, that when they do small pieces of it at a time, it doesn't feel super overwhelming. Having students write a 10-page paper, seems really, really scary. But when you write it 3/4 of a page at a time, or even a paragraph at a time, it becomes that much easier. I'm reminded of when I was writing my dissertation. I got this book called Writing Your Dissertation in 5 Minutes a Day, because of course, at the beginning, a dissertation feels totally impossible. It feels like there is no way that you're going to get this, couple hundred pages of a document done, this multi-year project done But of course, when you work on it a little bit at a time, it certainly is manageable. And that's exactly the message that we want to send to our students. And of course, it really sets them up to be able to apply this in other arenas as well. And so maybe even if they do have another assignment in a class that is much more open-ended, that's, get this final paper in by the end of the semester, hopefully then they'll have the skills to go in and be able to say, okay, if I'm going to have this final paper due by week 16, then by week 14, I definitely need to have a rough draft of that. That means then by week 12, I need to have a great outline going, whatever the situation is. Again, it will be adapted according to whatever your project is, whatever students are doing. But the hope is that not only can we apply this, but students can use it in any avenue of their lives as well.
Okay, so now that we've gone over some key points in scheduling, I'd really like for you to go over exercise 4 in your workbook. Pause this video and come back when you're done, and we'll move on to the next part. When you're designing a rubric, you're really trying to do two different things. You're trying to both convey to the students what you want them to value while they're doing this assignment, what you want them to focus on. And also you're trying to make a setup for yourself to not have to grade different types of assignments in different ways. So let's say you have something like a lab project or an arts project. Someone in an arts project might make a video versus a painting versus a sculpture, and you're going to have to grade those all with the same rubric. So this can be a real challenge, but it really pays off to start with your core goals for the assignment. So once you know what your core goals are for the assignment, all you have to do is assign those things point values, and then you really can understand and help the students to understand what's important to you in this assignment. So for instance, in the lab assignment that I assigned my students, I made sure to make the part where they analyze the data. So taking and analyzing data, I made that worth a lot more points than the other parts of the assignment. And so that way I can convey to the students that they should really focus on that. I don't need them to do as much research. I don't need them to do as much introduction. I really care about them understanding data. So that gives value to the parts of the assignment that you care about. And it also communicates to the students what you value in the assignment, and so they can do it. The other thing in the rubric is it makes it easier to grade. So once you set up a rubric, instead of writing a lot of comments when you're grading an assignment, you can just click the buttons on the rubric. So when you're working in Canvas especially, then you can, the rubric feature is really nice because you can just set up your comments ahead of time, and then as you click the number of points you're giving students, it also gives them feedback. So this is a really nice way to grade quickly without having to make a bunch of custom comments and writing directly onto their assignments. And this is also a good reason for having them submit directly into Canvas, because if they do that, either as a picture or a video or anything else, you can use the speed grader feature, which is actually really, really nice for getting things done quickly. It's not a joke. Speed grader is fast. So when you're creating a rubric, make sure you always are checking back with your goals. And the other thing is, when you create a rubric for an assignment, especially one that you've just figured out how to do, don't be afraid if you find that it's not giving you the results that you want. There's a difference between how you set up the rubric and what you're actually going to get. So if you don't get the results that you want one year, shift your rubric. Make sure you put more points in the places that you found students weren't putting a lot of attention into. They will understand at some level that that's important to you too. So you can see in the packet, Laura and I have both given you the rubrics for our assignments. My assignment was a 3-part assignment. It's kind of a doozy of a rubric. You have to go through basically 3 different assignments, but you can see at each stage I valued different things in the rubric, and that was hopefully communicated in the way the rubric is set up. Laura's rubric is a little bit more straightforward, which is another way of doing things. So for the arts project, even though there's lots of different ways to do it, right, a lot more versatility than what my assignment has, there's still a common way of grading that's fair to the students and feels fair to the students. So, even if they, and it means that they don't have to spend a lot of time and money as long as they hit the key points and learn the proper things. So I'd really like you guys to take some time and look over the rubrics that we used for our assignments, and then try to make your own. And just to sort of talk through the one I have, the reason I have it set up as this 3-part project is partly from the scheduling that we talked about earlier. So because I want them to have time to make mistakes and also to give them time to get materials and to really plan ahead, it's spread out in such a way that they have time to get their materials right at the beginning for the proposal stage. I always, if going back to scheduling, in the first 2 stages, the proposal and the draft, I always give them time to resubmit. So you can encourage them to submit early, and then they can resubmit as often as they want before the deadline, or you can be more lenient even after the deadline and allow them to resubmit until the final project is due. And what that gives you time to do is give them feedback before they actually are penalized grade-wise for your feedback. And I know that there's some sort of mentality that they should be ready and their final project should be perfect and they should somehow figure this out. But the reality is what we want to do is teach students. And the best way to learn, like if you give them feedback after the grade can't be changed, there's no incentive for them to go back and learn the stuff they didn't learn the first time. If you give them a chance to fix their grade, then there's a lot of incentive for them to do it correctly the second, the third, even the 4th time. It's a little bit more work on your part, but that's where the real learning comes. I mean, if you think about it, in a lot of ways, you remember your failures a lot better than your successes. And I feel like the students feel that very potently. And the other thing is, if you give all the feedback when it's too late, are they even really going to pay attention to your feedback? So once you have their attention, once they can get points back, you find that they really commit to fixing the things that you're concerned about. Whereas if you're giving them a grade that they can't do anything about, they might not even read your comments unless they're, particularly motivated students that just want to do it for their own benefit. So I think that this is a really effective tool that we're not utilizing enough in the classroom because it is difficult. But the nice thing is with the speed grader and submitting things on Canvas, all this carrying papers and projects around, which is an obstacle to getting some of this stuff done, it goes away. So I highly recommend having your students submit their stuff digitally so that you can grade it on your phone, you can grade it in the car, you can grade it, this feels like a Dr. Seuss saying, but you can grade it anywhere, with ham, with Spam, and jam. So we're going to give you guys the next few minutes to really look through the worksheet and come up with a rubric that you think will work well for your class. I'll go through on here how you actually put a rubric in Canvas because I think that's a really robust tool, and then you can submit that with the rest of your packet. So here's how you make a rubric in Canvas. So first you want to create an assignment, and we'll call this assignment lab project. And then you want to write some description here. And then you want to assign points, so let's say we want 20 points. There's lots of other features here. As you scroll down, you want to make sure the students can upload files, if that's the way you want it. You can also use text entry, website URL, there's all these choices. I always give unlimited attempts, which is what I was talking about with resubmissions. If you're having them type it, you can use plagiarism review. This actually works pretty well. Group assignment, all of that stuff. Peer reviews are useful. And then you can provide due dates, okay? So you save this. And then you hit rubric. So we'll call this some rubric. And for the rubric, we have lots of different descriptions of these criteria. And so let's say we wanted to submit this statement of purpose rubric. So we would say, okay, here's our first description. We'll call that statement of purpose. And you could give a longer description, which we want to call, a summary of the project. To update criterion, and then we make this out of 5 points, so you can say 5 points is full marks. You can edit what this says to say, like, really well thought out, including X, Y, and Z, if those are components you want to be part of your statement of purpose. And then that would be 5 points. You can also add something that's 3 points. So say that you're sort of getting it, and you can add more descriptions. And you can add additional criteria, so new criterion, blah, blah, blah. Okay? So you keep doing this until you have all your criterion. So for our proposal, that would be statement of purpose, hypothesis and objective, research, and materials, and they're each worth 5 points, and you could dictate what 5 points means versus 4 points versus 3 points versus 2 points, 1 point, 0 points, okay? So what this looks like in practice, if we go to a finished rubric, if we go to, let's say, lab project proposal, you can go to SpeedGrader, and you can see as you're grading students' assignments, there's this rubric that you can pop up. So you can say, for this assignment, you can see a split screen of the rubric versus not the rubric, and now you can click the points, and then when you save it, it populates the score into the assessment, and you can move on. Now you can also give comments, right? So you can go back to view rubric, and if you want to give comments, you can give comments here if the stock comments don't work. But see, this just says full marks and no marks. I do have other rubrics where you have comments. So like, for instance, for my exams, if you go to the SpeedGrader, you can see here's, if we view the rubric, the comments get much more complex, and you can do this in any assignment. So here you can have very specific comments for each point, and it gives a really clear communication that 3 points means something specific. And so if they're going to argue the grade, then they're going to have to argue based on what the rubric says. And it's also a really good way to give students fast feedback that they can really understand quickly.
So pause and take a couple minutes and work on building your own rubric, remembering the stuff that we just talked about.
Something that really helps students get started is seeing examples of other work. So here are some great examples from Laura's class and from my class.
Hello! Today I'm going to be demonstrating the photoelectric effect using an electroscope I fabricated a regular balloon, and a UVB lamp. The photoelectric effect happens when incoming light photons excite the electrons in a metal to or above their ionization energy. We are now shining ultraviolet light on the top of the electroscope. The light has a wavelength between 260 and 320 nanometers. Since the wavelength of our UV light is less than the threshold wavelength of the aluminum, negatively charged electrons are ejected from the aluminum and the electroscope loses its negative charge.
I do this. The reading of the galvanometer, like we see, is 0. So when I bring the magnetic near the galvanometer, when the magnetic actually is stationary, the galvanometer is reading 0. I'm going now to take the magnetic, and I notice that when I move the North Pole, maybe I'm gonna make it more close. When I move the North Pole inside the coil of the magnetic toward the coil, the pointer of the galvanometer deflect toward the right.
The coil starts spinning after a small push. The spinning speed varies depending on the size of the coil used. When the coils have more wires, they tend to spin faster. This proves that magnetic force is effective and can be easily proven. So let's try this one out. So you go like that, and you give it a small push and see what's going to happen. So you can see how it starts to spin, but then whenever it touches the resistor part, it stops, because the brownish one is actually not a conductor, so there's no current going on. So
proof of me and Matt. So this is the fidget spinner project.
So we have copper coils that are going to be powered, and that creates a magnetic field, and at the end of this fidget spinner we have magnets attached to it. When it's powered, you see the magnets are being attracted to the copper coils because they have that magnetic field. If I try and spin it, it's just going to come to, well, if I try and spin it, it comes to a dead stop because it's being pulled in this direction, and as it passes it, it experiences a pull backwards as well. So we have this sensor here, which is going to detect the magnet as it passes this coil, and we're going to put it on the lee side so that as it passes it, it'll turn off, so it only experiences pull in one direction. So we have this guy over here, which is our gate in the system, and it kind of like reads when this thing is on or off, and so it's going to be like a square wave thing, you know, that thing.
Yes.
Anyways, it comes past here, and as it passes, it reads that, and it spins, and it's just going to spin faster and faster and faster.
Yeah.
Now we can adjust voltage to get our speed.
Yeah, that one.
This one right here.
Yeah, that knob.
So if we have a lower voltage, it goes a bit slower. Crank it back, that's like 0.1, that's a 1.8 volts?
Yeah, 1.8.
Crank it back up to 10 volts. It's going to go a lot faster. You get a stronger magnetic field, so it's more power drawing it towards those magnets.
Hello, class. My name's Julie, and today I'm going to be talking about harmonics, specifically in the context of musical instruments and music theory, because I know over the past couple weeks we've kind of talked about them, as they relate to modern physics and using the concept of standing waves to talk about energy quantization, but I would like to bring it back to the start of the semester when we learned about sound. So, I know it's been a while, but here's a quick refresher. We've first talked about harmonics in this class as they relate to oscillation frequencies that will create standing waves on a string of a fixed length. I think that's one of the first labs we did. The fundamental frequency is the lowest possible frequency that causes the incident wave and the reflected wave to be in sync, creating a standing wave with one antinode right in the middle. Each successive harmonic adds another antinode to the wave, meaning another half wavelength is supported, and these frequencies will all be whole number multiples of the fundamental. Now, when it comes to stringed instruments, to be honest, typically you won't hear the overtones, which is just the name given to harmonics besides the fundamental, because when a string is hit inside a piano or strummed on a guitar or something, it vibrates with just one antinode. And if you want a higher pitch, you just shorten the length, tighten the string, or use a thinner one. But it's still totally possible to achieve these overtones. You just have to create the antinodes yourself. So like on a guitar, if you hold the string still at exactly half its length, you'll force it to vibrate at its second harmonic. Now, wind instruments actually behave in a similar way. Wind instruments, meaning just ones you blow into, are normally tube-like in structure and are built so that standing sound waves can resonate inside, much like they do inside the wooden body of a string instrument. But unlike, say, a guitar, where you can adjust wave speed through tension and linear density of the string or the medium, a wind instrument's medium is just air. So the fundamental frequencies are more restricted by the length of the bore, or the internal chamber of the instrument. The length of a clarinet, for example, can be manipulated by covering more or fewer holes, controlling the location of the pressure node, or the displacement antinode. But what about when I run out of keys to press and I've made the length as small as possible? This is where harmonics become necessary. I have to jump back down to a longer length corresponding to a lower fundamental frequency and utilize its overtones. So the lowest note I played had a frequency of about 155 hertz, and the higher one was at about 466. Now some quick maths there will show you that that's 3 times the fundamental, meaning I jumped from harmonic 1 up to 3. That's because the clarinet's closed tube acoustics make it impossible to generate even harmonics. So modes 1 and 3 are adjacent, and mode 2 doesn't exist. And when I tried to aim for a second harmonic, this is all that happened. Aside from flutes and piccolos, where both ends clearly remain open as you play, you might expect the majority of wind instruments to behave like a closed tube, since attaching your mouth to one end of the instrument effectively closes it off from atmospheric pressure, creating an antinode, while the other open end stays a node. But actually, the shape of an instrument's bore, or its internal chamber where the wave propagates, also changes the behavior of the waves inside. Clarinets have what's called a cylindrical bore because the internal diameter stays the same all the way down. This bell here at the end doesn't really count, since most of the notes are produced from air coming out of these holes up here, and they sound pretty much the same when you detach the bell. So this down here is mainly just to help stabilize the low notes with really big wavelengths. Many other instruments, however, have what's called a conical bore, which is where the internal diameter varies. Looking at the diameter of a trumpet, you can see that about 2/3 is cylindrical, but the last third of the bore the sound must travel through does have more of a cone shape. Brass instruments have this conical bore for a very important reason. They don't have many keys, therefore they can't change their length nearly as much as, say, a clarinet can, so there are far fewer fundamental frequencies. But that cone shape allows for support of both even and odd harmonics, even though the tube is closed on one end. I began to research the math behind this phenomenon because I wanted to talk about it in my presentation, but turns out it's some big brain stuff. And long story short, you have to consider propagation acoustic pressure in a tube as a particle in a potential well, where the potential is analogous to the radius of curvature of the tube. And as much as I would love to explore this more in depth with you all, it looks like I'm out of time. So thank you all so much. I've been Julie. Happy summer.
And it actually started because I was trying to think about how to get away from this sort of standard model of midterm and final. And, I still, I do it a little bit differently for my online versus face-to-face class. So they both do this project, but I kept the final for the face-to-face course originally. And since then, I actually have realized I don't really need it. It doesn't really, they have to think so hard about this assignment that I just made it bigger, so I made it something that was more involved. They got more weeks to do it. I told them it was like a serious assignment. When I first did it, I was so nervous that they were going to think this was ridiculous that I just made it like a small homework assignment worth the same as a page reflection. And now I really view it as a full-on project, something that they really have to put a lot of time into, that they really have to think about. I even have them present it in a discussion board to each other. And that's really great because they get a lot out of seeing each other's and responding to it, and they ask questions about it. And then they have to explain why they picked this color to represent this. And, it gets really much deeper than even I had realized originally. Are you good, Miriam?
I'm good. Okay, I
don't want to hold you up.
No problem.
Okay, all right, I'll talk to you soon. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.